Does the government work for us, or do we exist to serve the government? Are the freedoms that are guaranteed in the Constitution truly guarantees, or can the Congress give away its constitutional authority to coin money to private bankers? Tonight, your money and your freedom and the Federal Reserve. For 140 years, with two brief exceptions, the people of the United States of America and the federal government existed quite well without a central bank. Two presidents who understood human liberty and the dangers of giving power to central bankers, Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson, rid us of the first and the second national banks. From 1776 to 1913, when the American dollar was backed by gold, when the government coined and printed the money, and when there was no bank to manipulate the money supply or interest rates, the value of the dollar rose by 8%. That's hard to understand for those of us who were not around before 1913, because we have all grown up and lived in a society in which the value of the dollar has gone down as prices have gone up. But it is true, though there were bank runs and some panics, though there was, of course, a civil war and an illegal income tax, for the most part, in those 140 years, the dollar stayed sound, and it actually had greater purchasing power in 1913, right before the Federal Reserve came into existence, than it did in 1776 when the country was founded. The reason for that was the growth of the money supply. The number of dollars in banks and in circulation was a function of the free market, of individual risk and loss and gain, and not caused by an edict from the government or from a central bank. And all cash was backed by gold. In the 98 years since the creation of the Fed, we've experienced the opposite from what existed in the years before. Today, the dollar buys 92% less than it did in 1913. Though many will argue over the causes for that, there are clearly two: the loss of the gold standard and the flooding of the market with cash printed by the Federal Reserve. Today, the money supply grows not because of real increases in wealth, but because the Fed creates money out of thin air that does not need to be backed by gold. This is true until a few years ago, when the federal government needed cash, it called up the Fed and asked for it. Even though the Constitution says that Congress shall coin money, Congress has given away that power to the bankers at the Fed. The Fed then prints the money and loans it to the federal government. Today, the Fed no longer uses or needs a printing press. It's the digital age. It merely adds zeros to the accounts of member banks, and they lend that newly created cash out of thin air to the federal government. The result, of course, is that the government has the cash with which to pay its bills. It gets to pay its bills with dollars that are worth less than the dollars were worth when it incurred its bills. And it doesn't need to raise taxes. And all this can be done quietly and electronically. But that's only half the story. The other half is that the amount of money in banks and in circulation grows by the amount created that the Fed has loaned to the government. That doesn't constitute wealth. Remember, the government cannot create wealth. It just consumes wealth. All the extra cash being spent on the same number of goods and services is the classic definition of inflation. It is the cruelest tax of all, and there is no way around it. So all this government borrowing of money and the Fed creation of cash raises the prices of everything. As well, all the money that the Fed created and loaned to the federal government needs to be paid back. And that creates the obligation on the part of the government to pay interest. That forces future generations to raise taxes needed to pay that interest. And of course, when the loans are due and the government can't pay them back, it just borrows more money. That's how we've gotten into this mess. A mess where your government owes over $14 trillion that it doesn't have. A mess where your grandmother could buy 9 times what you can with $1. A mess where the solution of the president and the big government Republicans is to borrow more money. And to make matters worse, the Fed won't tell us what it is up to. Enter Congressman Ron Paul. First, he wants to examine the Fed's books, and then he wants to shut it down. Every day, more Americans can see how correct his arguments are. This time, he might just make them happen. Defending freedom every night of the week. So long, America.